Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to the webinar this morning and this afternoon in some locations. This is the second in our series on cannabis careers. I'm Kristen. Today I am very excited to be facilitating the discussion on how to write a cannabis resume and cover letter. Let's go ahead and hear what cities you're all joining us from. Feel free to post it in the chat along with any questions and comments along the way as we go. So welcome from all over the country. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you. We will have a Q&A session at the end where we will work to answer any of your questions. So please continue to post those over in the chat as well. To kick us off, I'm going to introduce you to the CannabizTeam VP of Operations, Diane Jones.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're hailing from. I'm from Toronto, so welcome from Toronto, Canada, eh? I'm very excited to be here to share with you some great information. Our team of recruiters have, over the 8 years we've been in business, reviewed over 250,000 resumes. So the information you're getting comes firsthand from our recruiters. As you know, we are a staffing and recruitment firm specializing in finding great people like all of you who have tuned in today, jobs in the cannabis industry. That's our passion. That's what we do. That's what we love. And that's why we want to share this information with you to help you find a great job. So we're going to cover a few things today. And I'm going to let you have a peek at it. Most important, though, please go ahead and put any questions you have in the chat. We'll dedicate a good portion of time at the end of the presentation so we can answer any and all questions that you have related to this topic and any other topic, but mostly this topic about how to write a great resume. So why do you even need a resume today? You know, John, in our last webinar, mentioned the whole industry has shifted. You know, John, you'll chat with him later, is our co-founder, and he's been in this business for 8 years, and he's seen the shift from this bro to pro. You know, where you could get a job in this industry before by just knowing somebody. I know John, you know, who knows somebody who says, go work as a cultivation manager there, and that's how I got my job. Right now, the industry has changed. It's become far more professional, and there's an expectation that you have a professional resume, which is why we want to share this information with you. You're going to hear from the team that this resume, whatever you do, is your elevator pitch. It's your advertorial. It's your sales pitch. It's the trailer to the movie. It's your entree to get an interview. That's what your resume is, and you need it. Otherwise, you won't get an interview. One thing I want to share with you is there was a study done by Ladders. They studied thousands and thousands of resumes being reviewed by a group of about 100 recruiters. They did this eye pattern study, and this eye pattern study showed a startling statistic that recruiters spend on average about 7 seconds reviewing your resume. You heard me right, 7 seconds. Think how short that is. In the time I sent that sentence, that's how long they're reviewing your resume. So you have to have not only a resume, you have to have a resume that stands out, because you're not going to get past those 7 seconds. And in that eye pattern, there were a number of lessons learned on how you should structure your resume, which we're going to share with you today. And I think the final thing that I wanted to say is, you know, I don't know what it's like for other organizations, but for our company, when we post an open position, we get between 300 to 500, 400 candidates, applications every time. So think of the competition you're coming up against. So if you've got a resume that doesn't make it past that 7-second mark, you are not getting that interview. So we say that you not only need a resume, but you need a great resume that stands out. So I'm going to hand you over to John, who's our co-founder, who's going to kick off by telling you a little bit about some of the resume mistakes we've seen, and then he's going to take you through some of the first steps to getting your resume started. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and please feel free to throw your questions in the chat as we go.
Awesome. Thanks, Diana. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm located in our headquarters location, San Diego, California, where it's not so sunny today, but we'll take it. Thanks again for joining. You know, as recruiters, we see hundreds of resumes every week, both good and bad. I think you owe it to yourself as a job seeker to really pay attention to detail in your resume and stay away from the common mistakes that we see all the time. We see them day in and day out, and it gets a little bit frustrating. Remember, once you hit send, there's no pulling your resume back once it lands in the hands of your employer. So errors on these resumes that you're sending out could potentially cost you your dream job. So I implore you to really pay attention to detail. In fact, there was a study done by Career Builder that was conducted online, over 1,000 HR and hiring managers, and it found the 4 most common mistakes that resumes that they see mistakes on resumes that can be instant deal breakers. The first and most important would be typos and incorrect grammar, and I'll get into that in a minute. Second would be not listing quantifiable results on your resume. Next would be using long run-on paragraphs of text. And last would be using just sending out generic, non-customized, one-size-fits-all resumes. So again, I'm going to get into now typos and bad grammar. Spelling mistakes and grammatical errors are the very top of the list and the most common mistakes by job seekers, and they're totally avoidable. If your resume has typos or incorrect grammar, employers and hiring managers come to the conclusion that you might lack attention to detail, that you don't care about the position, that you're not maybe educated, and they're likely to pass on and look at the next resume. In fact, over 60% of employers and recruiters will decline a resume based on these errors. I know internally in our team, we look at these errors, and sometimes it's incumbent upon us to coach our candidates and help them with their resumes, which we're happy to do, and we can talk more about that. One word or sometimes even one letter can turn off a hiring manager. So really pay attention. We suggest using getting another set of eyes on it, using a good spell checker. It's almost every browser has spell checkers in there. You can use Word, these other programs to ensure that your resume is error-free. You don't want to lose your chance of your resume even getting picked up or looked at just because it might have these errors on it. So before you hit send, we would suggest double checking it. We'll talk about a little bit more about the following later as far as quantifiable results and using run-on paragraphs and using non-customized resumes. So let's talk a little bit about creating a cannabis resume. So there's 4 must-haves here. The 4 must-haves, based on experience, we see our clients and they're asking for it every day. We boiled them down to the 4 most essentials that you have to have on your resume. We'll go through each section and show you how that this should look. We'll give you examples, and these include resume header, professional summary, work experience, education, and certifications. I'll talk about the resume header. If you look at the top with my picture and a little pot leaf on there, that is a resume header to avoid. The most important thing that I can say here would be to keep it very professional. Using a professional looking standard font to me is imperative. Also, if you look at the email address at the top, we suggest using a more professional email address. Again, Diane got into the bros versus pros. We're changing the industry one person at a time, and I think the entire industry is looking for professionals, and those professionals will have a better chance at landing these positions. Be sure that your phone number is not only correct, but also the voicemail that you have isn't just a generic voicemail. Make sure it's customized. I think it shows sometimes if they do give you a call, it shows a little bit of your character that could come out, and it might make the difference. Everything that we're talking about here is just improving your odds of landing your dream job here. So that's very important. Another thing would be to use a current address, which at least includes your city and state, If you're willing to relocate, that's important. Let me see, social media, if you have a LinkedIn profile, you can put your LinkedIn URL there. Please be sure that it matches your resume identically. The biggest thing would be a recruiting manager, recruiter can double check a candidate, making sure they are who they say they are, that everything's adding up, and they'll look at your resume and they'll compare it to your LinkedIn. It's very imperative, and we'll get into more that a little bit later. And no pictures or fancy graphics, just keep it very professional. And we'll go there. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about a professional summary. So this is your elevator pitch. All of you know what an elevator pitch is. It's basically telling somebody about you and the time it takes to ride up the elevator, typically 20, 30 seconds or less. It should be an attention grabber. It should scream out to the recruiter that they should keep reading your resume. It's a teaser, if you will, and you want to make sure that it's not too long. We suggest 3 to 5 sentences, positioned at the very top of your resume. I would use keywords from your job description and make sure you customize this for every job. If you're in business development, make sure you say you're business development, operations executive here. This is something that we wouldn't use. If you go to the next slide here, I like the top one, cross-functional legal and compliance professional. It tells this hiring manager exactly what you do. Typically, it encompasses the career details that make you an asset for this role. And it might include some hard skills and some soft skills, a little bit about your personality, a little bit about education, experience, accomplishments. But they're very short and sweet. They can have results here too. I know we talked about that. Actually listing quantifiable results in here. But again, this is your elevator pitch. You just meant to grab attention because you want them to review the rest of your resume, call you in for an interview, and get you in the hiring process. So we've taken a look at the first couple sections now. I'd like to pass it off to Liz. I think we're going to discuss a little bit more, show how you're a little bit more about how to show your work experience.
Awesome. Thank you very much, John. And thank you everybody for being here. So this is going to be a lot of information at once. So I just hope you guys can stay with me. And again, if you have any questions about what we say, please make sure you put them in the chat and we'll try to address them at the end. So the first big thing about your work experience is that this is not a job description, right? This is your way to clearly portray your expertise on your resume and this piece of paper. So when you talk about what to put, you want to have results, things that you've implemented in the business and the results and effect that it had on the business, right? When you're putting things, you want to do the scope of your expertise. So sometimes size of teams is huge for coming into cannabis. If you've oversaw 20 people versus another person that's oversaw 250 people and they're coming on to a bigger team or applying for a bigger team, that also can be huge. So make sure you have the scope of your expertise and what you bring to the table. And another example with that as well would be marketing, right? Making sure you know that they know that you clearly can do the digital, the social, the print, etc. So making sure the scope of your expertise is clearly listed. Now, again, we don't want to just list them as a job description like I do digital marketing and print and this. You want actual results, big wins, money that you've increased or made for the company, costs that you've decreased, ways you found to save money for the company, right? So definitely things that are result driven that show, again, your expertise and make you really compare well to your competitors out there. So example of this is not saying I'm great at customer service or excel at customer service. It would be grew the fleet from 300 to 500 cars on average via word of mouth and repeat business due to exceptional customer service, or achieved exceptional achievement award for customer service 7 months out of the 12 last year, only dropping to the second or third spot in the other months. So great results, shows you're great with customer service, but doesn't just list it. It shows what what you did and how you achieved that. And sometimes when you're wondering, what do I put, for a bullet point, or what will attract them, that is when we do say, use that job description. If they're looking for X, Y, and Z, take that and show how you did that with your relatable experience in your bullet points. The order is really important as well. For some reason, we see orders switched a lot, and it is our expert opinion that the top should be the most recent experience, right? You want to have what's fresh, what's most relevant there. And we also suggest only going back 10 years. If you have more experience or companies that are really big names that you want to, make sure people know that you work for. I know accounting, having the big four is important. You can list those. You can put previous experience and kind of list those positions and companies underneath without taking away from the substance and the stuff that they really need to see. So with that, we also suggest, and this I think is huge when you're coming from out of cannabis into cannabis, is a company description under the title or the name of the company. If I told you I worked for CannabizTeam without the great introduction that Diane gave us, you would probably have no idea what our team did. So it'd say CannabizTeam, the premier executive search and staffing firm in the cannabis, hemp, and CBD industries worldwide, right? So now you know what I do in the scope. So if you're coming out of cannabis, right? If you're in a manufacturing facility, if you're working with a marketing company that has, spirits, stuff like that, you need to make sure that the company doesn't have to search for it, or they might just not know and pass over you. So make sure that it's clearly displayed on what that company does. Quick, short sentence and description. Don't make them work for it. Make them just know exactly what you do and how it transfers. The next really big point is progression and longevity. This is gold to cannabis, okay? Cannabis, having progression in a job, showing that you were with this company for X, Y, and Z years, but then you held these different positions within those years, is something that is very attractive to us as recruiters for the cannabis industry, and also, any other hiring companies in the cannabis industry. This shows your dedication and your passion to these teams, and that's exactly what we need on our teams. So again, we'll show you in some examples soon how to list that clearly, but it is very important that you do not miss this very important part. Don't just say you are the head of marketing, even though you held, 5 other roles prior to that. Make sure people know that you are dedicated and push yourself to keep continuing to grow with the team. And then really the most important thing, guys, and I can't stress this enough, is bullet points, bullet points, bullet points. Do not put paragraphs. When it comes to your work experience, like Diane mentioned earlier, there's seconds that people take to read these resumes. So you need to make sure that these bullet points are strong. They have lots of juicy information, and those first 4 to 5 bullet points really should land you that interview. They should be the ones that really grab that person's attention and get them to say, okay, shut up, I gotta talk to this person already. They're great. So again, make sure that you do the bullet points. So we're going to show some examples now, just so you guys can see. They're not all perfect, but we wanted to show you the difference between the two. So the first example I believe that's going to come up is more of a paragraph form. Diane, perfect. And so paragraph form, you get lost in this. They're not going to see the important information. I can't tell you how many times if a resume is presented to a hiring manager prior to me coming into cannabis that they would say, I don't want to have this person because they don't have X, Y, and Z. Well, then I have to say, okay, go back to paragraph 1. They have this and 2 and this. No, do not make them work for it. You're going to then change this into what our next slide looks like, which is bullet points. And this has some good information where she has these applications and license information when it comes to compliance and equity, right? It's easy to follow down, see what she's done and her expertise. So definitely break up those paragraphs and get them into bullet points. The next example is really a great example when it comes to having that great little sentence at the top, you know exactly what this company does and what she achieved and all the states that she operated in. Then you also know all these great results that this person had, but they were with this company, if you see at the top, from February 2017 to May 2021. Then below, all the different positions that they held are listed with the correct dates. This will make sure that this company does not miss that you were with the same company for this long. Sometimes people like to put the title, how long they were with the company, and break it up like that. And I will tell you right now, people miss your longevity. So do not, make sure that is not missed, because like I said, it is gold. And then the next example, and she had great results in there as well. And this next example again is longevity, getting that experience. This is someone coming out of cannabis into cannabis, right? So knowing that they're in an engineering and technology company, that's pretty attractive. Knowing that they have transportation experience with one of their companies. All these things are attractive, takes the work out of, the client or the company that you're hiring for, and really gives you great results and better outcome when it comes to landing these interviews. So I know it's a lot of information, and I can definitely expand on anything. Anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn, which I'll put in the chat. But those are definitely the tips that I wanted to start with on how to build a really juicy and attractive resume for us and companies you're hiring for. And then last part I want to touch on is the skills section. So I will say refer back to our previous webinar, because we really highlight this on the skills section and what's relatable and transferable. But a lot of times people have a separate skills section, right? And I think, again, the skills section should be really dedicated to one thing, and I'll explain that soon. But if you have great communication skills, you should say, okay, well, I communicated with all levels of the industry or of the business, or created, this type of presentation for the C-suite. Show that you have those communication skills. If you're great with compliance, talk about the compliance that you did, right? Now, I will say some skills I do think is important to highlight is when it comes to systems. So if you're in accounting, marketing, a lot of times there's different systems you use, QuickBooks, Google Analytics, different things like that, that might be important to highlight, for those certain roles. But a separate skills section, these soft and hard skills should really, again, be clearly displayed in strong bullet points in your resume. So that's what I have for you for the beef of it. Now we're going to get to the education and certification part that Rochelle is going to take over, and she is residing there in Texas. So I know we're putting where everyone is. So go ahead, Rochelle.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you, everybody. Just jumping right into the education and certifications. These are two key sections in your resume that employers always look at. This information will inform viewers of your background, and also will tell them if you're going to be a good fit for the role. First, you want to look at the job description. So it's super important, because you're going to extract out relevant skills from your background. If you have experience in consumer product goods, you want to list that on your resume. You want to put, manufacturing, retail, cultivation. And then if you're a financial professional and you have a CPA license, that's obviously an asset to including in your resume as well. Or if you have a legal background, you have experience with mergers and acquisitions and real estate and contracts, just obviously include all of that as well. If you have more than 10 to 15 years of experience, put your education at the bottom of your resume without your graduation date. If you're a newer employee or a new person into the job market, you're a recent grad and you're applying for an entry-level role, put your education at the top and put your graduation date and any relevant coursework that you took while you were in college. Another thing that's really important is, cannabis education. There's a couple different areas you can look at. Green Flower is an online, on-demand training platform. You can go out there and you can learn a lot about the cannabis industry, about how things are grown, and just a huge array of things you can find to help bump up your training and certification in the industry. Also, there's a lot of universities around the United States that are offering cannabis courses, and even some that are offering cannabis degrees in biology or whatever it is. And then also Leafly and Weed Maps are great resources to learn more about the industry. Overall, candidates with some cannabis education and industry certifications will definitely get more attention. So let's go to the next slide. Perfect. And then we jump into, making your resume stand out. So there's 5 key things about letting your resume stand out. The first one would be your layout. Spend time reviewing the overall look of your resume. Check for enough white spaces, consistent fonts, clear section headings. And as Liz said, bullet points are really super important. You just want to be able to follow it really easily. Be sure to bold and underline important sections to bring attention to the important things you want to get across, and then use consistency, ideally, keeping it to 1 to 2 pages if you can. Also, make sure that you list, your most current role first and then previous roles below that. I get that all the time where people sometimes do that in reverse order. And then also number 2 would be correct tenses. Current tenses for current positions and past tenses for past positions. For example, if you're currently in a position, you could say something like initiating a new budget process. Whereas if it was a past position, you could say develop the budgeting process. Never write in the third person because that style distances you from the experience and it sounds like you're writing about another person. Always use the first person, but definitely leave out the pronoun I. For example, if you're an administrative assistant, I coordinated travel, don't say that. Instead, you'd want to say like coordinated, just leave that I out of there. And then customizing your resume, that's something that Ben will talk about next. But just moving on to the fifth one to make it stand out, it would be industry buzzwords. Try not to overdo the buzzwords. If they're commonly known, keep them out. Things like move the needle or proactive. There's a whole list of ones you can look at that you want to leave off. And then lastly, we just want to talk about action verbs. That's a huge deal with your resume. For example, if you work in the cultivation department, instead of saying responsible for, which is kind of passive and vague, you could say resolved IPM problems while increasing the monthly yields by 50%. It's all stuff that you want to kind of include in there. Not only do these words help show off your initiative, they also help build your overall tone of your resume. So let's look more on action verbs on the next slide. Thank you. Let's see. So your resume isn't really a place for modesty. This is where you really want to talk yourself up, talk about all the things that you've done, make yourself look exciting. You want to grab, the attention of the hiring manager and us, the recruiters. We see so many resumes on a regular basis. So anything you can do to really stand out is going to be important. Use industry appropriate action verbs if you can. And then, I'll look at action verbs for communication and then also some for management skills. For communication, I would say, instead of saying talked, led, presented, or organized, I would use addressed or corresponded, persuaded, and that sort of thing. And then on the management skills side, instead of saying, led, handled, oversaw, you could say consolidated, appointed, delegated, or established. Leadership experience is excellent for a resume. However, you want to say things like you've led a team or you established a team. Those are key, action verbs of things that you can say. So doing these things will surely help make your resume stand out. So let's go to the next slide. And then just the last slide here is going to be on boosting your resume's attractiveness. What's really key is action verbs. You can see in the bar chart here, 100, it increases your chance for an interview at 140% by using really great action verbs. So that's really kind of the key takeaway. There's some other little areas you can look at here, but the main one is the action verbs. And then just to recap, use education certifications in cannabis training, emphasize strong action verbs, highlight, quantified achievements, and then just demonstrate that you're connected and passionate about the industry. Those are super key in this industry. So anyway, so going on, I just want to introduce Ben, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about customizing your resume for the position you're applying for and the importance of cover letters. So Ben, go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, Rochelle. So I'm going to talk a little bit about customizing your resume for each job that you actually apply to. So I know that Liz and Rochelle did touch on the majority of these items, but I did want to highlight and unpack a couple of them. Diana mentioned a little bit earlier that most large companies have an ATS, or an applicant tracking system, that does all of the first level screening for companies. So essentially these systems are going to review your resume compared to a preloaded job description, and that system is then going to look for keywords in the job description as compared to the resume that got submitted. So as cannabis companies become larger and larger, a lot more of these companies are going to adopt and implement these systems. So the importance of making sure to take a couple minutes and just tailor your resume to the job that you're applying to is really like absolutely crucial. So some studies show that I think that these systems reject about 75% of resumes that are submitted just based on the fact that they don't match the job description and job requirements for that specific position. Something else you should consider is highlighting all of your transferable skills. I know we've touched on that a couple times throughout this webinar and the last one, and how they can relate to the cannabis industry and the position. So for instance, if you have experience in a manufacturing position, considering highlighting any of your quality management, health and safety, and Lean Six Sigma certifications that you might have. If you've got experience in a retail management role, be sure to include your experience with P&L management or inventory management, scheduling, people management, and recruiting. And if we move on to the next slide, I'll kind of go through 5 tips on how to write a cover letter for a cannabis job. So you should always do your cover letter after completing your resume. Writing a new cover letter for each position you apply for will really help you focus on a specific position and company. So cannabis employers want to see that you're excited about the role that they're offering. You want to be able to express how you've used your most relative skills and be able to showcase your passion for the role. So number one being, go beyond your resume. So one of the most notable tips on how to write a cover letter for cannabis jobs is to not just restate what's on your resume. Being repetitive could send your application straight to the trash. You should focus on expanding on what you've already stated in your resume to give the cannabis employer a more comprehensive picture of your accomplishments. Choosing resume bullets that highlight skills and experience that can really help the cannabis company. Number 2 would be highlight the right skills and experiences. So you should thoroughly research the cannabis company you're focusing on. In addition, you'll want to analyze the cannabis job and the expectations for that position. So when choosing which bullets from your resume you want to expand on, you want to pick ones that align with the role. Usually when companies write their job descriptions, they list the top requirements and skills first. So you're going to want to describe how you can deliver on the cannabis position's primary responsibilities. You can use tools like word cloud or find keyword, and that'll allow you to see words that actually stand out in the job description. The number 3 would be including statistical success from past positions. Something that John and Liz both mentioned earlier, and something that I really talk to a lot of my candidates about, is using quantifiable success for both cannabis job cover letters and for resumes. So even if you haven't worked in positions where success can be immediately measured by numbers, you can still include statistics that show your impactful contribution. So it could be something as easy as explaining you implemented a strategy bumping up cannabis dispensary sales by 25%. Even if you dealt with people more than figures in your last position, you can include your statistical impact here as well. You can think about how often you do something or the time frame in which you completed a complex task without sacrificing quality. And the bottom line is that numbers and statistics will make your resume and cover letter more appealing. Number 4 would be consider using or including testimonials. So incredible feedback from clients and coworkers or managers should be considered for your cannabis industry cover letter. However, you want to weave it into the content in a way that feels natural. Dropping in a full testimonial will seem out of place. So you want to paraphrase the testimonial so it fits well instead of using the full quote. The same could be applied to using references here in your cover letter instead of putting it actually on your resume. It should all be very quick and precise. And number 5 would be writing a gripping first line. So the best movies grab your attention from the very beginning. Little and no time is wasted to get you focused on the story. That kind of goes the same for your cover letter. So yes, it is permissible to mention your cannabis job that you're applying for and to stick to something simple in your introduction. However, you want to make sure that your first line is interesting. So you've got a variety of ways to start, so you want to choose wisely here. Here's some ideas you can get started. Using an interesting fact about yourself, mentioning a captivating statistic, using some humor, state an enthusiastic observation about the company, or mention a pain point your skills and experience can address. And that kind of covers that. And then moving on to the next slide is going to talk a little bit about, are cover letters still relevant? So are cover letters still needed? As a recruiting firm representing you, we say for us, no, we don't necessarily need it, because essentially when we send over your resume to a client, we're also including an executive summary or a set of executive bullet points that is going to highlight what may not be black and white on your resume, but you'll need it when applying elsewhere. So you can see some of the stats on this slide. So overall, about 50% of employers prefer candidates with cover letters, and about 50% of recruiters believe cover letters show motivation. So in the end, cover letters have long been a part of the application process. However, some now suggest that modern recruiting methods may make cover letters obsolete. So are they still necessary? And what does optional actually mean in the job postings when it comes to the cover letter? So in general, a cover letter can only help your job application unless the job posting specifically requests you not submit one. The impact of a well-written, error-free cover letter can potentially mean the difference between landing a job interview or not. If a job posting says submitting a cover letter is optional, I would take this to mean that a cover letter would be a welcomed addition to your application. Also, take it as an opportunity to show the employer not only your initiative, but your writing skills. An optional cover letter ultimately leaves the decision up to you. So taking the time to write a thoughtful cover letter could prove a positive to your candidacy, especially for a competitive role. So my suggestion would always be to err on the side of caution and submit a great one. So I'll now pass it off to Kristen for our Q&A portion of our webinar.
Sorry about that. Here we go. So this is the Q&A portion of the webinar. We're going to answer a few of your questions that were posted in the chat. Of course, we won't be able to answer all of them, so please submit any questions to us at our email address. It's contact@CannabizTeam.com. We'll also post that in the chat. To answer this first question, I'm going to pass it over again to John. He is a co-founder for us and a current recruiting manager located here in San Diego. So John, one of our most frequent questions we receive is, how do you best represent yourself as a consultant on your resume?
You know, that's a fantastic question. And sometimes it comes down to personal preference, but I'll tell you, I'd say the best way to attack that would be to list your overall dates that you acted as a consultant. You know, let's say your first was 2019 and you're still consulting. It might be between different positions. You could say 2019 to present. But as a consultant, underneath, I would definitely bullet point and list specifically the companies that you worked for and those dates. And we like to indent those. You want to, list any results and the role you performed. If you were a, let's say, cultivation consultant, business development, licensing and compliance. Occasionally, we find applicants will take consulting gigs, consulting assignments between regular jobs. And if you just list that 6-month period that you did it for one company or 3 months, it looks like you're jumpy. I'd say overall, depending on how they're listed on your resume, it can look like you're changing jobs frequently. You don't want to appear jumpy. You don't want to have any gaps in your resume as far as the dates. Employers are really looking for long-term sticky employees, if you will. They're going to be with the company for a long period of time. But let's just face it, consulting engagements can be very lucrative. Sometimes the pay is double what a normal salary position would be. But the only problem there is you're going round and round on the merry-go-round and you're trying to grab the brass ring, and you need to keep firing up these consulting engagements. So again, list the entire period of time that you acted as a consultant, and then below that, I would bullet point it and avoid any gaps in there. So that's my best advice. I'd be happy to speak with anybody in particular, do a one-on-one if they have that, because it's very nuanced, and it can help
Great. And I know, John, we've had discussions about it too before, and how to best list that experience, because sometimes it can seem really vague. And I think listing even what area you were a consultant in, if you were in business development, if you were legal, if you know, getting down to more of a specific title and instead of just using the word consultant can also be really helpful too. So thank
Absolutely.
you.
Sure.
Perfect. Now I wanted to pass it over to Stephen. He is one of our top staffing managers for our temp division for this next question. So if someone says, I've just graduated, how do I create a resume that will help me to get a cannabis job, an entry-level cannabis position?
Hello, guys. Great question. Sorry about that. So, if you're just coming out of school, generally what I would say is any job that you've had, put on the resume, right? So, and I'm sorry, my dog is barking. And then, I mean, make sure that that's a real good chance to, in the, that first section where you're basically stating your objective. That's a really good way to be able to say how your experience both in school and what your goals are, and kind of morph that together, right? So you're basically, anytime you're trying to get a first job out of school, it's your real opportunity to be able to kind of pave your own path in terms of goal, and then being able to say how your experience prior kind of led into that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I know we receive questions all the time about listing whether a position is temporary or permanent, whether to list our wages or our hours. And for us, I know, and Stephen, maybe you can kind of tell us, do you encourage people to list those items on their resume? So it was whether it was a contract or permanent, or list wages and hours.
Yeah, so definitely making sure that you're listing, what type of employment it was, and that'll really open it up, right, to a lot of different, or it'll open up your search to a lot of different potential options. So, I mean, again, speaking to cannabis specifically, a lot of times when you're entering the cannabis world, it starts off as like a temp or attempt to hire position. And so if you've had experience like that before, even if it was just a contract, making sure that you list that, so that, because some people, they go to a contract and they don't really understand like what the probationary period means, or like what the end goal is, right? They're just kind of like there, and they don't really have a plan as to what the end goal is. And so if you've had that experience before, you definitely want to highlight it so that you can show that you've worked in an environment where you're able to meet deadlines by a certain project date, that you're essentially able to handle a working interview, which is what that project is, right? It's like let's say it's a 4 to 6 week project. That's a 4 to 6 week interview, right? So it's essentially basically, showing that you can stand up in that environment, and that, with that quick turnaround, that you're able to perform and, use that as a strength.
Perfect. And I know, Diane, you had something else you wanted to add in there too as well. I'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're just graduating, you're looking for a temp job, everything Stephen said is accurate. Include any work experience you got. And again, remembering what Ben and Rochelle and John said, customize it to the job. I want to expand a little bit on the consultant question. And I think it was Melissa or Jessica who asked that question. I'm a consultant myself. I've been a consultant myself for many years, so I know exactly what you're experiencing. So again, it's name of your company, dates to dates, and then look at the job description, the job you're applying for, and choose your contracts and the work experience you've got that's relevant to that job. And that's the one you're going to put all your bullet points on. You can add a couple of others, but really focus in on what's in the job description. That's how you're going to get your consultant experience and your contract experience if you're temping to parlay into a full-time job. I just wanted to add that piece in there.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. I wanted to pass it over again really quick to Liz. She is one of our permanent services senior recruiting managers in Baltimore. She has seen tens of thousands of resumes. So I think I really enjoyed this question that we received about how to best show longevity if your title didn't change. and if you wore multiple hats in your position.
Awesome. This is actually one I get really excited about because sometimes I know if you're with a company for 12 years, I highly doubt, I think it was Jessica that put that in there, that you've only done the same thing for those 12 years. So I guarantee you in those 12 years, you wore many hats. And when it came to writing my resume coming out of, let's just say, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, for example, I did HR, I did sales and marketing, I did logistics, I did profit analysis, I did training, I did the hiring and the firing. I did so much that when I went to write my resume, I was there for 10 years, so very close to what you did. I looked like I was crazy and I had no idea what I did for a living because I had so many different things on my resume. So what I suggest is to make subcategories, right? Take all your experience, boil it down to 4 strong categories. So sales and marketing, logistics, profits, and growth, right? So you could maybe boil it down to 4 big categories to show really your strengths and your expertise with what you did for so long or how many hats you wore, and then clearly list some strong bullet points under there. So that's my suggestion personally for someone who wears many hats and again has a long time in one role, to show all the different things that you took on, because that is also very attractive to cannabis. You know, wearing many hats and with one title is something that we all do. So definitely that's the way I would tackle that. Thank you.
Perfect. You know what? I want to pass it over to Ben, also in our Baltimore office. We've got an awesome team out there. Ben, would you be able to tell us if you feel like it's important for showing a reason for leaving a position on your resume?
I feel like that could maybe go 2 different ways there. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily encourage candidates to put a reason for leaving a specific job unless there was a break in employment. I think that that's always a relative. Like if you took a break for health reasons, or if you were laid off during the pandemic, or if you just took a break year, I feel like those are opportunities for you to put on there that there is a reason for leaving. We can very easily explain those situations when we present resumes to the actual hiring managers, but from the outside, as a candidate just applying for positions, more often than not, you're going to get overlooked because you have a 1.5 year gap on your resume that isn't able to be explained, because they're not going to reach out to you and ask you why you were gone from a position for 1.5 years before they consider you. You're probably just going to get rejected off the bat. So I think that's it's kind of situational. I would say sometimes if we're submitting them, I might not necessarily put it on there. I would explain that in my presentation of the candidate. But if you're applying on your own as a candidate on the outside, I would maybe put something in there if it is for an extended period of time, but not necessarily just for leaving each job.
Perfect. And I know you touched on the cover letter. Would you include something like that in your cover letter?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, if you took, it's funny, I actually just talked to a candidate the other day that had like a 7-year gap on his LinkedIn, and I didn't even notice it. It was so far back, and he had taken 7 years off, and he was a stay-at-home dad. So, whenever you submit a resume, if I just like taking a look at his resume and I saw the 7-year gap on there, I would maybe think something is going on there. So that cover letter is really a great opportunity to say, like that you have been back in the workforce for, the last 2 years, but prior to that, you were a stay-at-home dad while your, partner was, out in the workforce, and you brought up your twin daughters or whatever the case may be. It's a good kind of opportunity to paint your kind of a little bit of your life story there, but also to explain away, some hesitations that might be on your resume, like when a hiring manager is actually looking at it.
Perfect. I think we have just like one more question. I did want to pass it over to Rochelle. Rochelle, can you tell us your opinions on whether to include references on a resume? And we kind of touched on it, but I'd love to hear kind of your opinions on that.
Yeah, definitely. I would probably not put it on a resume. I would probably keep it separate. For the way we do it in our with recruiting here is we have the resume, we present you to a client, and then once we kind of get into the first, second rounds, we start to want those references, and we would do those separately because it's just too much information, I believe, in my opinion, to have that put on your resume. I do see it. People do actually send resumes in like that, and my suggestion is just to hold off on that and then send it kind of separately when they're asked for.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense. Well, Thank you so much for all of your questions, everyone. If we did not answer your question, I did put the email address in the chat. Be aware that we can't necessarily respond to everyone because there's so much interest in the cannabis industry, but visit our website, apply for any open positions that interest you there. We love seeing everyone posting their LinkedIn pages. It's a great way for everyone to connect with other professionals in the cannabis industry. Check out some of our other resources here on our website, on our blogs. So many helpful tips and different topics that you can get more informed and educated about in the cannabis industry. Also check out our salary guide, which is listed on our website. It is a great way to educate yourselves on the different salary ranges in the industry, and then you're also more prepared when you finally get that cannabis interview. Thank you to our presenters for dedicating your time, and to everyone that joined us today. Join us for our next webinar on the cannabis careers, discussing how to harness the power of LinkedIn in your cannabis career. Thank you for allowing us to help educate you on this topic of the resumes and for being a part of your cannabis career journey. Thank you, everyone.